He was lying in like a pool, literally a pool of blood.
I remember just thinking, what am I going to say? What do you say to his mum or dad?
I think I was just in disbelief. I couldn't comprehend what he'd said. I didn't even question what he said. I don't even think I spoke.
You couldn't touch him. He wasn't yours anymore. He was a crime scene.
Someone knows who's done it. And I know people must be frightened, but they've got to think that they can't leave this killer out there.
It seems that this police investigation is now focusing on the killer being somebody who was aged between 13 and 15, just a few years older than the child that they killed.
"11-year-old Reese Jones lived on the Croxteth Park estate in Liverpool.
Croxteth Park estate, which is predominantly housing estates. There's something like 3,000 privately owned houses. And in the middle of the estate is the Fir Tree pub. And then very close by is the only block of shops on that estate with a medical centre, a school and a church nearby.
We'd lived on that estate for 17 years. I've never felt unsafe. It's a lovely area that we live in.
Obviously seeing groups of kids knocking around, but you know, nothing more than what you do as a youngster yourself, you know.
It's a really lovely looking estate. You know, you drive on it and there's trees, there's woods, there's plenty of greenery. All the houses are nice. With it being private, everyone has a bit more pride in their homes, and it's a lovely looking place.
I'd never had any worries about letting the boys go out and play. We've never had any trouble up there.
Although it's a massive estate, I would say it was quite close, really, because there's only a little block of shops, and obviously that's the centre point of the estate. I think most people know each other.
Reese lived with his mother, Mel, father, Steve, and older brother, Owen. It was a happy family life, where Reese was thriving.
We were just like a normal family, you know. Steve works permanent nights. I had a little part-time job. The boys were both at school and both doing really well. Weekends were always a bit special because Steve was always off on a weekend, and we'd always make sure to do things together as a family.
We gave him every encouragement to go out and, you know, be active and have a good time.
Reese was a popular personality and loved by family and friends alike.
Reese was a very happy and energetic little boy. He was also very funny and just a really outgoing little boy.
He's one of those lads that you couldn't be mad at for very long. And even if you were mad at him, he'd just make you laugh. He's just lovable and likeable.
Reese was, he was cheeky little lad. He was always smiling, always laughing.
He was always playing tricks, and he was dead mischievous. He'd always make mud balls and start throwing them at the kids, and then all the other kids would join in, and I'd just be tearing my hair out, like, shouting at him, you know.
But Reese's biggest passion was football.
I think the passion for football that he has took up all of his life. It was just football, football, football. Played for the Fir Tree for about 12 months. I think he played his first season. He was going into playing his second season for them.
He was a good footballer. You could see it from an early age. He could kick the ball further than other kids of his age, and you could see that there was something special about him.
The 22nd of August 2007 was a warm and sunny day, and for the Joneses family, it started like any other weekend.
I'd been to work in the morning. I came home and Reese was starting senior schools in September. So we said I'd just go to town and get him his new uniform.
I worked permanent nights, so I'd been in bed most of that day. And I got up round about tea time. Obviously, I had my tea. Reese, I knew, was going to go and train.
He'd go training once a week and he'd play a match of a weekend.
We decided that we would get together for an extra training session because the season was due to start on the following Sunday.
But he was more excited because England were playing that night as well. So there was quite a buzz going around in the house because he wanted to get back for the match. He just had a light snack and then he just went up and put his kit on.
Reese left home and made his way to football.
Reese always used to take himself to training. As you come out of our house, it'd be a 5-7 minute walk on one straight road straight up to the football pitches behind the shops.
The training ground would have been just to the right and slightly set back behind the pub. More or less right next to it, really.
Soon after arriving at football practice, Reese realised he'd forgotten something.
The training session on that particular evening started about 6 o'clock. I'd asked all the kids to get there. Reese had forgot his £5 signing on fee. And he went, oh, I forgot my money. And you could see him start to panic a little bit. And before I could even say anything, off he'd gone. He'd run home. Reese!
I was sitting on the settee watching the TV when he came bursting back through the door because he'd forgotten the sign-on money. Obviously, he badgered Mel, and he just sat on the end of the couch waiting patiently for her to give him the money.
Instead of just leaving it and paying next time, he wouldn't. So I gave him his signing on fee, and because he was going to be late, I put him in the car and I drove him the couple of minutes up the road to the training field. He just kissed me on the cheek and said to our mum, I'll be home to watch England.
With his subs fully paid, Reese finally joined his teammates.
We'd done a couple of little warm-up things, you know, we'd run round the field, then we'd do a couple of little stretching exercises. You know, there was just a couple of little exercises like that. But we never really spent much time doing that because I always thought it's better if kids are playing football rather than, you know, doing exercises.
After a successful training session, Reese was ready to make his way home, looking forward to watching England play Germany that evening.
I was at the back of the car with the boot open, putting stuff in, and Reese walked past the front of the car. And he said, ta-ra. And I said, where are you going? How are you getting home? So he said, it's all right, I'll walk. I asked Reese to get in the car 2-3 times. And I even said to him, no, come on, get in the car, I'll drop you off, it's no problem. Come on. And Reese was adamant he was walking.
Hey, Reese!
It was a pleasant evening as Reese made his way home, a journey he had made countless times before, but one that would be his last. "11-year-old schoolboy Reese Jones was a popular and passionate footballer, adored by friends and family. He had a promising future ahead of him, a future he would be denied. Having turned down a lift from his football coach, Reese Jones was making his way home on foot. He took his usual shortcut across the Fir Tree pub car park, only 500 yards from his home.
The 22nd of August was a hot summer's evening. The pub was very busy.
On that particular evening, England were playing Germany. A lot of people who were sat outside because of the nice weather and also because of the smoking ban. And Reese at that time had finished his football practice and was walking a relatively short distance home from the football field.
I jumped in my car and I drove probably 50 yards, and Sean was in the passenger seat and he screamed out Reese's name. And I looked back. I've seen Reese hit the floor and I knew immediately he was hurt. The first thing that entered my head was he slipped. So I slammed the brakes on in the car and I jumped out. But by the time I'd done that, Sean had opened the door and jumped out. So he got to Reese before I did. Just before I got there, a girl got there. She worked in the pub. This girl had grabbed hold of Reese. She was trying to administer some sort of first aid. He was lying in like a pool, literally a pool of blood. The girl was shouting to me, he's been shot.
Call an ambulance!
It's just that bit, seeing him. Sean was hysterical. So I'm shouting to Sean, he'll be all right, but I just froze, I was numb, I couldn't have done anything at all. The first thing I done was get my phone out and I phoned the ambulance and the police. And all the time, Sean's running around hysterical and I'm trying to say to Sean, he'll be okay, don't worry.
A distressed Steve didn't have Reese's home number, so he frantically called local resident and fellow Fir-Tree football coach, Tony Edge.
I could hear the panic in his voice, and he said, Tony, I don't know what to do. Reese is being shot.
I started to shout a little bit. Just get round there and get his mum and get her here now, immediately.
I remember just thinking, what am I going to say? What do you say to his mum or dad when they answer the door?
Reese's football coach, Tony, raced over to the Jones family home.
Well, I was just sitting on the settee watching the telly and there was a knock at the door. And I just opened the door and Tony was just standing there.
I said, Steve just rang me and he said Reese is being shot, but I don't know how bad it is. That's all I know.
And he just went, you just need to come with me now. And I didn't even have time to think, or I just ran into the living room, grabbed my keys, my phone, and I just got in the car.
Well, the distance from Reese's house to the pub car park was about a minute in the car. We were just really in silence and we were just wanting to get there as soon as possible.
I think I was just in disbelief. I couldn't comprehend what he'd said. I didn't even question what he said. I don't even think I spoke.
A stunned crowd had already started to gather round Reese.
It seemed like there was hundreds of people all around. I couldn't see anything at first. I got out the car and I just heard someone shout, "Here's his mum." And then as I heard that voice, all the people that were together just sort of stood apart and Reese was just on the floor. And I just ran over. I could nearly even see where he was hit. I could just see the pool. He was lying in a pool of blood. I just put my hand under his head and I said, "Come on, Reese, you're going to be okay, come on. You're going to be okay, I'm here now. It's going to be fine." And people were screaming and, "Where's the ambulance?" But I was just, "Come on, Reese, just look at me, you'll be all right."
Tony never went over to Reese. He left Mel and Tony come over to me and I was sort of trying to explain to Tony what had happened.
When I saw Steve, he was distraught, he was in tears and, he's probably thinking if we hadn't have had training that night, it wouldn't have happened.
It felt like an eternity till the ambulance arrived. It just felt like an eternity. I was still there, still holding on to him. And then when the paramedics arrive and they're working on him, and I just wanted them to help Reese. I just wanted them to save him.
I think I was on the M57 driving along when I got a call off Mel. And it was a very, very short call just saying that, "Steve, you need to come home. Reese has been shot." And the first thing that went through my mind was that some kids had an air rifle or an air pistol and they, let off a pellet or something and it struck him and, lodged him or whatever it was. I didn't, for one instant, think that it was a proper firearm that he'd been shot with.
Well, when we got to the hospital, everyone was there waiting for us. They're all working on them and there's a whole team of people and you're thinking, "Oh, it's going to be okay, they're going to..." And they allowed me and Steve to go in and we were rubbing his legs and took his boots off, we were rubbing his feet and they were telling us to talk to him and while they were all working on him and we were thinking, "It's going to be okay, it's going to be okay," because they know what they're doing and they can see him, but they tried so hard, didn't they?
The doctors desperately tried to save Reese, but the young boy tragically never regained consciousness.
I think the hardest thing for us was leaving Reese in the hospital. We didn't want to go home and leave him there.
You couldn't touch him. He wasn't yours anymore. He was a crime scene.
And we just went home in shock. Reese, you know, we just went home and we were just sitting in Reese's room and we just all started crying. We couldn't understand what's happened.
At 6 o'clock, the murder of an 11-year-old boy in Liverpool.
He was shot by another youth on a BMX outside the Fir Tree pub in Croxteth.
He was shot in the neck last night in Croxteth on his way home from football practice. He died later in hospital. And the police say
knows who this killer is. This is not a time for silence. Do the right thing and turn them in.
As the shooting made headline news, across the country there was stunned disbelief. Merseyside police quickly mobilised, determined to find the schoolboy's killer.
It's probably one of the largest murder investigations that Merseyside police has run. The fact that he had no involvement and was an innocent victim in the middle of all this. You know, the pressure was there to solve this offence and to bring the people or person responsible to justice. There's a large number of detectives who were deployed immediately onto it to conduct the outside inquiries. You've got the incident room itself, there's a lot of search teams involved, all the scientists, crime scene investigators.
In the early hours of the investigation, it was clear to the police that the shooting was gang-related.
On the Croxteth estate? The Croxteth Park estate itself is about less than a mile from the old Croxteth council estate. We were aware that there was gangs in mainly the old Croxteth estate.
You've got a situation in Liverpool 11 where, in effect, two close-knit geographical locations, which is Croxteth and Norris Green, are separated, in effect, by one road. And over the years, there has been a number of incidents involving almost like conflict between these two groups, which had escalated and had started to actually use guns.
We were aware of certain things that had gone on in the past, you know, between, you know, Norris Green and Croxteth crew and stuff like that. But, you know, we'd never been a part of it. We never witnessed any of it. We just never thought that it'd overspill onto, you know, our estate.
The whole scenario of there being gangs on the estate and young boys having guns just seemed a world away from the life that we were living. I just couldn't comprehend it.
I just wanted to understand. I just wanted to know what had gone on, why someone could shoot an 11-year-old boy. Because I knew that Reese didn't hang around with those type of people. You know, all his mates were all just good lads.
The very next day, Reese's parents conducted a press conference, pleading for witnesses.
Someone knows who's done it. And I know people must be frightened, but they've got to think that they can't leave this killer out there. It could be their son, could be their brother next time, because it'll happen again. If he's not caught, it'll happen again.
Witnesses who were near to the scene at the time of the shooting began to come forward. They described a crucial piece of information. They saw a teenage boy riding a bike.
There were 3 shots fired in total by the gunman on the night. The first one was aimed at 2 lads who were riding their bikes across the pub car park. They then rode off on their bikes, and he's obviously tracked them, aiming at them again, and has fired a second time. That bullet struck Reese, and then, amazingly, the gunman continued and fired a further shot, the third shot, still obviously tracking his intended target at that time, even though clearly Reese had already fallen to the floor, having been struck.
There was eyewitnesses who told us they'd seen the gunman, but unfortunately none of those were able to identify him.
The police then obtained a vital clue: CCTV footage of the killer on his bike.
The significant piece of CCTV footage that we had and was used in this case was that taken from the pub system itself. That showed the gunman obviously approaching from the rear and going to either side of the pub. At that stage, he's clearly looking for his intended victims. You see him come back across the rear of the pub and he then comes out the other side, which is at the point where he stood astride his bike and fired his weapon 3 times.
When the gunman left the scene, we knew that he'd driven through the Croxteth Park estate on his bike. He'd crossed over Fir Tree Drive North and was narrowly missed by passing traffic, and across into Dam Wood, which is a wooded area that separates Croxteth Park and the old Croxteth estate.
Unfortunately, it wasn't that clear with regards to the face of the gunman. But what it did give us, which was quite crucial, was the actual dimensions of the bike.
As the killer made off with the gun, the pressure was now on the police to locate the gunman, bike and the murder weapon.
It was important to identify the offender at an early stage. Obviously, there's a youth out there who's armed, could well use that gun again.
11-year-old Reese Jones was shot in the neck on his way back home from playing football in Croxteth, Liverpool. His death in 2007 shocked a nation, and the local community was struggling to make sense of the tragedy.
Everyone was just staying inside, that, you know, because people were frightened. People were frightened that it was going to happen again, you know, because, you know, if it could happen to Reese, it could happen to absolutely anybody.
I think the circumstances of Reese being shot and killed created an element of fear, and rightly so, within the community. People knew that we hadn't arrested the offender. You've got to put yourselves in the position of a parent living in that location and thinking that could have been my child.
You do have an instinct to keep your children safe, especially after something like that's happened. The streets around here were empty of kids.
People on the estate were obviously very protective of their young children. It certainly changed my view on where Sean could go and who he'd play with. I wouldn't let him go 2-3 streets away on his own. If he was going round to his friends, I'd drop him off there and I'd pick him up.
In the early stages of the murder investigation, the police already had a prime suspect. Postings on a social networking site had already named one boy as the alleged killer, 16-year-old Sean Mercer.
You did hear teenagers saying things, and obviously Mercer's name was all over the internet that night.
Mercer had a number of previous convictions, only a small amount for relatively minor crime. There was an ASBO in force against him at the time, but he was well known to the local police as being one of the youths who caused trouble, and he was related to the Croxteth crew.
Reese was shot on the evening of Wednesday, the 22nd of August. By the Friday, what we had then was a number of pieces of information and intelligence that had come into us to suggest who the potential suspects were in this. By the Saturday, so you're talking 3 days after the murder of Reese, a number of arrests were made on the morning. Sean Mercer was arrested on that day with a lad by the name of Dean Kelly, as was James Yates.
Mercer, because we thought he was the gunman, was put on an identification parade, and 5 witnesses who'd actually seen the gunman fire the gun across the car park were asked to attend that parade. None of them were able to identify Mercer as the gunman. When Mercer was initially interviewed, he gave a prepared statement through his solicitor, which said he'd been in the company of Dean Kelly, a friend of his, at the relevant time. He also said in that statement that the 2 bicycles we recovered from his house on the Saturday morning were the only bikes that he had. None of those two bikes matched the bike that we'd seen on the CCTV of the offender.
The Croxteth crew gang closed ranks around Sean Mercer. Even his mother, Jeanette Mercer, who was present at the police interview, vouched for her son. At this stage in the investigation, there simply wasn't enough evidence to categorically prove Mercer was the murderer.
We know that if these people are going to try and, cover the tracks and hide, we know it's going to be difficult. We know it's going to be a long, hard slog. We just thought, well, we're in for a long haul here.
There was an element of silence around the actual offender, but only carried out by the people who knew and assisted him at the relevant time.
With no actual eyewitness, no murder weapon and no bike, Merseyside police had no choice but to release Mercer and his accomplices back into the community.
It was frustrating letting Mercer go. Everything at that stage was pointing towards him being responsible for the murder of Reese. And we knew at that stage that it was going to be quite a long and protracted inquiry.
The name of the offender is being mentioned in the community and was quite widely known.
I mean, we specifically asked that we didn't want to know any names from the onset, is that, because there was a lot of rumours going around, there was a lot of, the reasons why and how and stuff like that.
Personally, we didn't want to know. We knew there was names being bantered about, but we didn't want to know until that person was actually charged with Reese's murder. We didn't want to know.
We had to get the evidence sufficient to charge and build an appropriate case to put before the Crown Court. We just can't put people away whilst we gather the evidence.
If you're the killer and you're watching this, turn yourself in. Similarly, if you know who is the gunman or who put the gun in his hand, do the right thing.
And I think if someone had walked into a police station and held a hand up and said, I'm the person responsible, or, I'm in connection with it, then, it makes things a lot easier, not only for the police, but obviously for us.
On the 6th of September 2007, thousands of mourners gathered at Liverpool's Anglican Cathedral for the funeral service of Reese Jones. With emotions running high, the pressure was on Merseyside police to find the gun and the missing bike, which would crucially link prime suspect Sean Mercer to the crime scene. In a desperate bid to uncover the alleged killer's movements, the police turned to mobile phone intelligence.
There was 2 calls made to Mercer before the murder of Reese, and obviously what we would infer from that is that they were calls to say that the intended victim was in the area.
Police used Mercer's phone logs and CCTV footage to establish the sequence of events around the time of the murder.
He left on his bike just after 6 o'clock, and from there he went into the old Croxteth estate, where he was captured on a number of CCTV cameras riding his bike, and we believe he actually collected the gun that he used to kill Reese from James Yates's girlfriend's house on Croxteth estate.
We established that the offender, having taken possession of the gun, he then went and carried out the shooting, obviously striking Reese in that process.
Following the shooting, Mercer rode off to the home of a 15-year-old boy, referred to as Boy M.
We believe Mercer chose Boy M's house for a number of reasons. A, it was the closest of his associates to the Croxteth Park estate, so he could get there quickly and get off the streets as quick as possible. And also, Boy M was only 15 years old at the time, and while not a member of the Croxteth crew, he had been involved in gang activity. He was young, he had behavioural problems himself, and Mercer knew he could tell Boy M what to do, and Boy M would do it.
It was from Boy M's house that Mercer hatched his plan.
Mercer made a series of telephone calls to his associates, and effectively he called his gang members in to assist him, and they helped by making plans to dispose of the gun, dispose of his clothing, douse him in petrol to get rid of any forensic evidence and also to get rid of the bikes. It's a belief that petrol will dispose of any of the residue that's discharged from a firearm when you've been in close proximity to it being fired.
But which of the Croxteth crew gang members were involved? Melvin Coy, age 24.
He made a phone call to Mercer about 20 to 7, informing him of the people being present from the opposing group.
Gary Kays, age 24.
He made a phone call to Sean Mercer just before 7:10 to alert him to the fact that members of the opposing group were in the area on the pub car park.
James Yates, age 19.
James Yates was an associate of Sean Mercer, and he had actually given the gun to Mercer on the night in question.
Nathan Quinn, age 16.
He attended at the friend's address with James Yates immediately in the aftermath of the shooting of Reese.
Dean Kelly, age 16.
He's a friend of Mercer, who he was actually with at the time when Mercer was arrested. It was 3 days after the murder of Reese. Dean Kelly, at that point, gave an alibi, in effect, for Sean Mercer.
On the night of the murder, Mercer, Yates and Quinn got into Melvin Coy's Ford Galaxy. They drove probably 1.5 miles, 2 miles to the Kirby Industrial Estate where Melvin Coy had access to a lockup, and it was there that Mercer's clothes were burnt and Mercer was cleansed of any firearms residue using petrol. And as a result of examining CCTV, we were able to identify Melvin Coy's Ford Galaxy entering the estate. We did execute a search warrant there. The only things of significance that we found in that lockup were 3 empty petrol cans.
Having quite clearly established Sean Mercer's movements, the police needed to trace what had happened to the murder weapon.
As a result of intelligence that we'd received, a search warrant was executed at the home address of Boy X. In the loft, we recovered a Smith & Wesson revolver, a self-loading pistol and ammunition that fitted both of those guns.
The type of residue that was recovered by the forensic scientists from the gun matched the residue that was recovered from Reese's football shirt that he was wearing at the time.
Boy X was arrested and interviewed.
He gave us an account that Mercer had phoned him, told him to come up to Boy M's house, went into the house and was confronted by Mercer, who gave him the package and told him to take it back and hide it. Now, Boy X was petrified. He felt intimidated by Mercer.
Mercer called Boy X because he knew of him and knew him from the area, but Boy X was not a member of the same group that Mercer was. Boy X took the gun to his home address and he left it in the back garden. And then on the Sunday, another associate of the main offender moved that gun into the loft of Boy X's address.
With such a crucial statement, Merseyside Police took the unusual decision to file an application with the Crown Prosecution Service to offer Boy X immunity.
The use of that legislation is very, very rare, and particularly where a youth is concerned. Witness testimony from Boy X was a major part in the inquiry.
The evidence was slowly mounting against Mercer and his gang. As the police were waiting to hear back from the CPS, they still needed to track down a vital missing piece of the evidence that would bring Mercer to justice. In August 2007, schoolboy Reese Jones was gunned down by a teenage killer riding a bike. Merseyside Police arrested and questioned various youths from Liverpool's notorious Croxteth crew gang, including prime suspect Sean Mercer. But despite having to release Mercer and his gang members as they carried out further investigation, the police were quickly converting intelligence into evidence. Having recovered the murder weapon, the police were now awaiting approval from the CPS to see whether boy X would be granted immunity if he testified against Mercer. But there was still the question of the missing bike.
The bike that Mercer had used, we knew had gone back to his home address later that evening from witness accounts. But from his home address, we didn't know where it had gone, and it remained outstanding.
The police launched a fresh appeal to help trace the bike.
Following our press appeal, a member of the public came forward and said that he'd been cycling himself in the Kirby area near to the industrial estate, and he'd found the bike frame minus its wheels and taken it back. Forensic examination of the bike revealed Mercer's DNA on the bike itself.
Mercer's mother, knowing that he had possession of that bike, she deliberately misled the police during the search by saying that bikes that we recovered at the offender's home address were the only bikes that he owned, and she repeated that fact during later police interview. There's a huge difference between even believing that her son had done it and actually deliberately lying during police interviews, during the police search, and quite clearly trying to frustrate the police investigation.
We'd recovered the bike frame, we'd recovered the gun, and we had other witness accounts which basically blew Mercer's alibi away.
All that remained was a decision from the Crown Prosecution Service on boy X. In April 2008, the CPS had made their decision.
When the Attorney General had made the decision that boy X was going to be offered immunity from prosecution, within days we re-interviewed boy X, obtained his witness account. He entered into the agreement with the Crown Prosecution Service that he would give truthful evidence in return for the immunity from prosecution.
On the 15th of April 2008, Merseyside police arrested 14 people, including Sean Mercer, James Yates, Gary Kays, Melvin Coy, Dean Kelly, Nathan Quinn, and boy M.
And they were subsequently charged, Mercer with the murder of Reese and the others with assisting him to dispose of evidence. When Mercer was arrested on the 15th of April, he was interviewed again. He produced a prepared statement in which he denied any involvement in the murder of Reese and chose not to answer any further questions. Gary Kays and Melvin Coy basically denied being involved in assisting Mercer. The others, when they were interviewed, there was a mixture of people choosing not to answer questions, saying no comment.
As well as the Croxteth crew gang members, a number of adults were also arrested.
Because we knew Jeanette Mercer had lied to us when she'd made witness statements, saying that Sean Mercer had only had the 2 bikes we'd recovered from the house, and because she had possession of his mountain bike on the night of the murder, a decision was made to arrest her.
At his house?
She denied any involvement.
Unless somebody had taken them?
James Yates's parents, Francis and Marie Yates, were heavily involved in trying to assist Mercer and their own son. We know that Francis and Marie Yates burnt a SIM card that the police failed to find when they'd searched James Yates's house, and that was the SIM card that he'd been using at the time, and that was crucial evidence.
I think it was shocking, sort of like the help that they got, and it wasn't, so much as, Mercer and his mates that sort of like, took him away, whisked him away and doused him with the petrol, got rid of evidence, got rid of the bike and stuff like that. But it's the adults that were involved with it as well.
Almost 14 months after Reese's murder, the trial took place at Liverpool Crown Court. Sean Mercer pleaded not guilty.
Throughout the trial, Mercer and his 6 associates were in the dock and frequently would be laughing and joking and not listening to what was going on.
And it was an 11-week trial, and it was a terrible ordeal for us to go through and to listen to, and you're scared to let your emotions out because you think if you do, you're never going to stop crying. You're never going to pull yourself together again.
I think it's fair to say that the behaviour of Sean Mercer and all those people in the dock with him at that time was poor, to say the least. This was all done in front of Reese's mum and dad as well. I think that is unforgivable, but I also think it actually shows the type of people that we're dealing with here.
The jury found Mercer guilty of the murder of Reese Jones. He was sentenced to 22 years in prison.
Mercer showed no remorse at all. Even when he was sentenced, very little emotion on his face.
He's destroyed us. He destroys our life.
In order to get your head around things, you need somebody to be charged. You need somebody to be found guilty. You've got to have a sentence that you feel reflects the enormity of what they've done.
We got justice for Reese, because as the sentencing goes, you know, Sean Mercer got the maximum what he could get. And in the eyes of the law, we've got justice. But I personally feel life should mean life. He should spend the rest of his life in jail.
These people should realise that, you know, if they're going to go around firing guns and murdering people, then, you know, they should spend the rest of their life in prison.
There does need to be change regarding guns and gangs. But as a parent, I don't know the answers to that. I think the police and the politicians need to sort that out.
I, like any other cop, is going to sit here and say to you that we would like it to be no incident of gun crime. But unfortunately, there are firearms out there. There are people who are prepared to use them.
Something needs to be done. It could start with tougher sentencing, you know, give the judges the tools to do the job, get these people off the streets, you know, get them to learn the lesson that, you know, if you're going to get caught with a gun, you're going to end up with a hefty sentence, and, you know, and make them serve that sentence.
But Reese's death would not be in vain.
We've set a charity up in Reese's name. It's the Reese Jones Memorial Fund. The charity is to raise enough money to build a much-needed community centre in Croxteth Park, where we live. Somewhere for all the kids to go, keep them off the streets, keep them busy, give them an interest.
I work quite closely with Steve Gagan, which is, we do a soccer competition each year for the kids. Fair Tree take part, you know, the old lads that Reese used to play football with, and it's a really, really good competition.
Reese just lived for football. Everything evolved around football. And in terms of keeping Reese's memory alive, then the most appropriate way to do it is through football.
I just remember Reese as being a really bubbly, lovable lad. He just make you laugh.
I just remember Reese smiling. He was always smiling, he was always laughing, always joking around. And he was always his most happiest when he was playing football.
There is just one story this morning, the dramatic end of the Gorbachev era in the Soviet Union.
She was one of Britain's most high-profile television presenters, at the pinnacle of her career, when she was shot down in cold blood outside her house in London.
I felt completely numb, really, in many respects. It was just the most extraordinary piece of information I think I've ever been given.
Her killer left the scene without a trace.
It was a ruthless murder. He went right up to her, pushed her down onto the step so that she was kneeling, placed a gun to her temple and fired a single shot.
The execution of Jill Dando sent shockwaves through the nation and sparked the country's largest criminal investigation since the hunt for the Yorkshire Ripper.
For the first few days, almost whole editions of newspapers were filled with this story and nothing else.
More than 2 decades on, the murder of Jill Dando remains a mystery.
Could be almost anyone, we just don't know who he is.
On the 26th of April 1999, BBC television presenter Jill Dando was shot by a single bullet to the head on the doorstep of her home in southwest London. The hunt for her killer prompted the biggest murder inquiry ever conducted by the Metropolitan Police. 2 years later, after a controversial court case, local resident Barry George was found guilty of the killing. But during a dramatic retrial, he was cleared of Jill Dando's murder. So who shot one of Britain's best-loved television personalities? This is the story of the brutal slaying of Jill Dando, told from the inside through the eyewitness accounts from those closest to the story. Born in Weston-super-Mare, Jill Dando began her journalism career as a reporter on the local paper, the Western Mercury. Determined to work in broadcasting, she eventually went on to become a presenter for BBC South West. She quickly rose to become a household name when she moved to the BBC's national news operation in London, presenting the breakfast news and the 6 o'clock news. But she was best known as the face of the hit shows Holiday and Crime Watch, a series that explored unsolved criminal investigations. Above all, Jill Dando was renowned for her down-to-earth charm that endeared her to millions of viewers.
It didn't matter whether she was doing Crime Watch or the news or the holiday programme and the other things she did. She had a warmth and sincerity about her, which is not really something you can learn. It's just the way you are. And I think Jill had that connection with the public that made them feel like she was their sister or their auntie and part of their family.
Jill Dando was one of the most popular people on television. She was kind of a darling of the BBC. She presented mainstream programmes like Holiday and Crime Watch. And she had a really, I guess, very pleasing personality that people really responded to. She was, people felt that when she was presenting programmes as if she was talking to them through the screen, and that was a great gift that she had.
When she moved to Fulham, she lived in the next road to where I live, and we would always bump into each other in the local shops, in the street, and that's how we would chat and catch up.
She was great fun, had a fabulous sense of humour, but very serious and professional when she needed to be, and she was just a great person to be around. Throughout, certainly my years on Crime Watch, it was always a very close-knit team, and Jill fitted into that perfectly.
It was another young woman who was going to be the face of Britain at the millennium. So she was the embodiment, in a sense, of the BBC.
As well as enjoying a successful TV career, Jill had recently announced her engagement to Dr. Alan Farthing.
She was getting married, she was talking about Alan and the wedding and getting excited about organising everything, and she had so much to look forward to, so much fun, happiness in her life.
I remember bumping into her when she came back from Sydney, when she'd been on holiday, and she was totally in love.
The pair had met on a blind date at a dinner party in 1997. They became engaged in February 1999 and were due to marry that same year. To her friends and colleagues, Jill was as happy as she'd ever been, and she shared with them her desire to become a mother. On the 26th of April 1999, Jill Dando had spent the night at Alan Farthing's home in Chiswick.
Jill left her fiancé's house in Chiswick. I think it was about 7 or 8 in the morning. The plan was that she would go from the house to, I think she had a fashion shoot at lunchtime, a job she was doing, and then in the afternoon she was planning to go to a fitting for her wedding dress.
Miss Dando had been going to her house purely to get changed. She was no longer living there. She was living with a boyfriend several miles away.
Jill lived on Gowan Avenue in Fulham, southwest London.
So Gowan Avenue, typical residential street, quite middle class, lots of comings and goings, a typical morning, a very ordinary morning, nothing unexpected appeared to be going on. People taking their children to school, the postman coming down the road, neighbours coming and going.
When she bought her home in Fulham, was so thrilled about it, she told me that one of the reasons she'd chosen that home was that it had a hedge and it had a tree that afforded her privacy.
Having left her fiancé's home in Chiswick, Jill made various stops on her way home, including a brief visit to the petrol station, Kings Mall shopping centre in Hammersmith, and a fishmonger's on Fulham Road. It was around 11:30 a.m. when Jill finally arrived at Gowan Avenue.
She got out of her car, having parked it, and in fact, still had the keys to the car in her hand.
As Jill was about to approach her front door, she was unaware that somebody was closely watching her every movement. As she looked for her house keys in her bag, she was approached from behind and shot once in the head. The BBC's Golden Girl, Jill Dando, was the TV star everybody loved. She was full of excitement at her future plans to marry Dr. Alan Farthing and start a family. But these plans would never bear fruit. Having spent the previous night at her fiancé's house in Chiswick, on the morning of the 26th of April 1999, Jill Dando was shot dead on the doorstep of her Fulham home.
It was very unusual to see Jill's car parked in the road because she was living with her fiancé in Chiswick at that point. I thought, oh, I might see Jill as she comes out of her front door. So as I approached her home, I deliberately looked at her front door, and there's a very tiny pathway from the pavement where I was to her front door, and I couldn't believe what I was seeing.
What it seemed to have happened was that Jill Dando had gone to her home address, albeit she wasn't living there anymore, and it would seem that she was attacked and shot effectively on a doorstep just prior to entering her house.
It was a ruthless murder. It wasn't done, the shooting wasn't from a distance, the killer wasn't standing at the gate, he wasn't sort of leaning out of a car, he went right up to her, pushed her down onto the step so that she was kneeling, placed a gun to her temple and fired a single shot.
There was no time to prepare. From one step to the next, everything changed because I was witness to an incredibly violent scene. At first, it was difficult in the first few seconds to realise it was actually Jill, and she was actually in that position on her doorstep, leaning against her front door. She had changed colour, there was a lot of blood loss, and instinctively, it was clear to me that she was dead. I looked around, there was nobody else in the street, and I quickly got my mobile phone to call the emergency services. When I was talking to the emergency services, I said that I thought that she had been stabbed because of the blood loss. It didn't occur to me at that point that it would have been a gun crime. And I added in the conversation, confidentially, it's Jill Dando.
Shocked and distressed, Helen didn't want to be alone.
I remember that I'd seen a neighbour who lives near me. So I ran down the road and knocked on the person's door. My neighbour came to the scene. She took one look and said, she looks as if she's dead, and ran off, further up the road to a doctor's surgery. So I was left on my own again at the scene, looking at Jill, who was lifeless on her own doorstep.
The police were first to arrive.
They just went through the gate and started dealing with Jill. They pretty quickly bundled me and the other two, the doctor's receptionist and my neighbour, into Jill's neighbour's home.
Soon after, the paramedics arrived, and then the air ambulance. Jill Dando was taken to Charing Cross Hospital.
She was certified dead at 1:03 p.m.
The BBC television presenter Jill Dando has been murdered outside her London home.
A man was seen leaving from outside number 29 Gowan Avenue, and he ran east down this road towards the Fulham Palace Road.
Detectives are now trying to establish a motive for the murder. Our correspondent Fergus Walsh.
I felt completely numb, really, in many respects. It was just the most extraordinary piece of information I think I've ever been given.
In this country, although there are a lot of shootings, they're usually linked to the underworld, crime gangs, teenage gangs. But a lady like this, shot on a doorstep in a West London street, a nice West London street, very respectable, quite well-heeled, was extraordinary.
The image that really is very, very difficult is her beautiful engagement ring with all that hope in it on a very dead hand. Just snuffed out.
Scotland Yard launched into action with Operation Oxborough, the largest criminal investigation since the hunt for the Yorkshire Ripper.
Regardless of who the victim is, there needs to be a methodical approach to the inquiry. It was just because of the victim, in this case, being such a high-profile celebrity, that everything was increased. For the first few days, almost whole editions of newspapers were filled with this story and nothing else.
Also important to put this in some perspective, because the London police were on the alert searching for the now bomber, David Copeland. And so there was a huge amount of police activity around London and a lot of news media concentration on that issue, because there'd already been two now bombs, one in Brick Lane, one in Brixton, and there was a great deal of concern about where this now bomber was going to strike again and what the reaction would be.
With unprecedented media attention surrounding the police investigation and the victim's high-profile status, the homicide squad came under immense public scrutiny. They faced their first hurdle with a forensic examination of the crime scene.
Yeah, one of the main problems that the police had was that it had been quite severely compromised by the medical services that had been there, by them removing her body once it was clear that there was nothing more that could be done, created some problems. Very little was obtained from that scene. What they had done, I can't criticise that, because I assumed that everything was being done to try and save Miss Dando's life at the time.
There was nothing that came out from the scene other than the fact they, of course, had the bullet which had killed Jill Dando, which was quite unusual. It was crimped, it had been pressed in. They used 50 search officers going down the surrounding streets, and they took up the drains, they looked at the sewers, they looked all along the riverbank by the park in case that the gunman might just have tossed the gun over a hedge or threw it into a drain.
We can't be sure, obviously, about the gun that was used because it's never been recovered. But the thinking was that it was in some way a reactivated gun, or one that had in some way been adapted.
After the forensic examination of the crime scene proved fruitless, the detectives turned their attention to examining witness statements.
There was no eyewitness to the actual offence. Several witnesses gave information about a man who was present at the scene before and immediately after, and one of the main focuses of the inquiry was to identify this person.
Richard, her neighbour, said that he had heard her set her car alarm and that he had heard a scream looked out of the window and he'd seen somebody go past further down Gowan Avenue.
One of the problems that the team was faced with was the unprecedented amount of information that was being received within the incident room. During the course of the inquiry, over 2,000 people were named as being responsible or in some way involved in Miss Dando's murder. Without a clear witness or without a clear motive and reason, stranger murders are by definition the most difficult to investigate.
In a cruel twist of fate, detectives turned to the very programme Jill had presented in a bid to find her killer.
You never imagine in your wildest dreams the idea that you would ever have, or we would ever have had to make an appeal about somebody we knew so well. There was a pressure on us to think that we could do something to help, to use the programme and to use our experience to try and help in some way. And I think everyone was actually really relieved that they could feel that they could do something. The appeal itself to find information regarding Jill's killer produced a lot of phone calls.
Several witnesses saw a man in the area earlier in the morning. And then there are various sightings of a man in a sort of waxed jacket. We have somebody who saw what they described as a sweating man at a bus stop. We have another sweating man seen in Fulham Palace Park, or Fulham Park, which is opposite, quite close to Gowan Avenue, who was talking on a mobile phone. So there are lots of different little sort of sightings, but nobody actually saw the attack.
One of the main purposes of the inquiry is to try and separate the potential suspect from other people.
And I think as the months went on, it was quite apparent that this was going to be a long investigation.
As the police inquiry continued, the funeral of Jill Dando took place at Clarence Park Baptist Church in Weston-super-Mare. Mourners lined the streets to watch the 3-mile cortege.
I was not able to attend Jill's funeral. I did go to her Thanksgiving at All Souls in Langham Place, which was like the funeral for me. And I can remember trying not to cry at that, because it was definitely a Thanksgiving for her life.
A grieving nation mounted pressure on the police to bring Jill's killer to justice.
What we needed to be sure of, was she followed, wasn't she followed? There was a small and dedicated group of officers that meticulously went through every scrap of footage that we had during the course of the inquiry. What we can categorically say is that from the meticulous examination of the footage from 191 cameras, she wasn't followed at all to that address.
They also searched through 80,000 mobile phone records for the Fulham area and also for Chiswick, which could in some way be linked to her death. Either somebody following her who passed on a message that she was on her way home, or somebody who was waiting and got the message that she was arriving. None of those phone calls produced any evidence either.
The months rolled by, but no leads emerged, and police were struggling to gather any significant evidence.
Her file of facts had 486 names in it, and they went through every name and address they could find. They looked at her fiancé's background and drew a blank on that.
I realised that on day one, I was probably on a list of potential suspects being first on the scene. That's a normal thing. The nearest and dearest of a victim are always scrutinised, and I knew that I would be too.
Because of the nature of who Miss Dando was and her work, it was hard to ascertain a definitive motive as to why someone would conceivably want to kill her.
Obviously, one of the lines of inquiry was the possibility that there had been a stalker or somebody with an unhealthy interest in Jill Dando who might have come along and killed her.
Like a lot of celebrities, she'd attracted a lot of unhealthy interest. They found, for example, that one man had tried to acquire her BT account and run it unknown to her, but which would allow him to look at her phone calls or phone numbers. They found that somebody else had 150 pictures on his, of her collected on his computer. Another man had attempted to take over her utility bills, electricity, gas, water. Extraordinary behaviour by some of these people. But the police looked at about 4,000 people, I think it was, of whom about 150 seemed to have what they would describe as an unhealthy interest in her. But at the end of the day, none of these had showed any evidence of taking their interest further than a fantasy or a fixation.
In April 1999, the television presenter Jill Dando was shot dead as she entered her house in Fulham, southwest London. The brutal nature of the execution-style murder shocked the nation. Initial police inquiries had failed to find any evidence. There was no murder weapon, no evidence at the scene, and crucially, police were unable to find a motive for her killing. But as the investigation reached its first anniversary, police turned their attention to a man well known in the area, Barry Michael George.
George had a conviction for a sex attack in the 1980s. He also discovered that there was a reference on his file to the fact he'd been arrested in the grounds of one of the royal palaces with a length of rope around his shoulder and a knife. And the palace concern was the one where the Prince of Wales and Princess Diana were then living. And they found that he'd been stopped by police in the 1990s for following women. Nobody at Fulham Police Station actually knew anything about him, interestingly. Barry George turned out to be a very long way down the suspect list.
He was described as a loner. And he was almost a usual, one of the usual suspects, because the police hadn't found anybody and they came back to him.
Barry George had been reported to the police in the early days following Jill's murder.
A detective constable called John Gallagher discovered a message about a man called Busara, which had come in from Hafad, which was a local drop-in centre for disabled people, very close to the scene of the shooting, in which they said that this man, Busara, had seemed very agitated and they were concerned about him. The policeman did some checking and found that Busara cross-referred to Barry George.
Barry George often claimed he was the cousin of British musician Freddie Mercury and used the alias Barry Bulsara.
To some extent, he was living in a fantasy world, especially in relation to Queen and music and all the rest of it. But this is it. It was an overtly fantastical world where, he wasn't hiding away.
He pretended that he was the cousin of the singer or the musician in the Electric Light Orchestra, that his name was Paul Gadd, which is in fact the real name of Gary Glitter. And he had a name, Steve Majors, that he also used. And he pretended he was in the SAS, and that seems to have been an amalgam of Lee Majors, the actor, and Steve Austin, the $6 million man from the television programme. So because of all these different names, and because many of the people had phoned in to the police about him anonymously and not giving a name, it took the police several months to connect all these incidents and realise that they were all sightings of the same person.
I think most people who lived in Fulham were aware of Barry George wandering around the streets. He's quite distinctive. He was somebody who probably needed a little bit more help than he had in the community.
But further examination of statements given to police during the early days of the investigation began to reveal more.
By now, police were getting very concerned because they also knew, looking through their records, that a local taxi firm had also called the police soon after the shooting to say they were concerned about a man who kept coming in and seemed to be trying to build up what, as it appeared to the police, to be constructing an alibi for himself.
Timings were crucial, of course, because the killing took place at around 11:30 in the morning. Question, where was he? And his case was that he'd attended at a local agency, Hafad, housing agency, and that he'd gone home and changed clothing, and he'd gone to a park and gone to get a taxi somewhere else. And so his defensive alibi was that he wasn't in the road when it happened.
An investigation into his past revealed that Barry George had a history of unusual behaviour. He suffered from a personality disorder, had a fixation with celebrities, and was known locally to follow and photograph women.
There was one case of, I think it was a woman in a bus queue, and then he got on the bus with her. Now, this is very overt behaviour. In other words, it is somebody who is, I think, desperately anxious to create a relationship, which he hasn't got, with somebody. And so it's an unhappy situation, and it's very unpleasant, I suspect, for any woman who is on the receiving end of this treatment. And in a sense, he needs help if that's what was going on. But this is a long way away from the nature of this crime, which wasn't about following Jill Dando around in order to create a relationship.
The psychological profilers were talking about somebody who might well fantasize, who might, for example, have fantasized over Princess Diana, somebody who'd had difficult relationships in the past, which Barry George had had. All of these things added to the list of things that ticked off that made him a very strong suspect, and then eventually the strongest suspect.
More than 12 months on from Jill's murder, the Metropolitan Police arrested Barry George at his flat.
4 unarmed officers, or that is what Scotland Yard still maintains, arrested him, and they began a search of his home. And that is when things became interesting.
I mean, Barry George's flat was absolutely stacked to the ceiling with old newspapers. You could barely get in it. So he, again, might be regarded as an oddball for keeping all these newspaper cuttings and so on. But, so, yes, there was a sort of obsessive side to this man because he collected things, but I know lots of people who collect things. Maybe not to that extent. Obsessive of Jill Dando? Absolutely not. You know, you would think that if he was obsessed with Jill Dando, he would have accumulated quite a library, because she was in the newspapers very regularly. None of it was cut out, none of it was highlighted. There were no notes anywhere suggesting he was wanting to find out where Jill Dando was at any one time.
They took a coat that he'd worn and sent it for examination. They developed about 100 reels of film which he had, which showed that he'd been stalking around about, I think it's 480 women.
The police investigation also revealed that he had an interest in firearms. Barry George was interviewed at Hammersmith Police Station in London.
This is a man who originally had told the police that he had nothing to do with guns and hadn't had anything to do with guns for quite a long time. But police found that, for example, he tried to join the parachute regiment, the TA section of it. He tried to join the regular army. He belonged for a short time to a gun club in Kensington. He'd had a number of starter pistols. A former neighbour of his had seen him with a weapon.
After he was arrested, it was plain he did have an interest in firearms. I mean, he didn't have the weapon that is said to have been used here, but he did have an interest in weapons. But that doesn't mean that he's the murderer.
He said he had nothing to do with Jill Dando. He didn't know Jill Dando lived in the area. He'd never met her, never seen her, and denied any link at all to the murder.
Barry George was asked to take part in an ID parade.
He refused to go on an ID parade, and so the ID parades were done on a laptop with potential witnesses being shown a series of images of possible suspects, plus innocent people, and picking them out from a laptop display.
There was a neighbour living right next door to Jill Dando who was looking out on the road, and a man living opposite. They both saw somebody departing from the gate area where this had happened. And they both went to identification parades, and neither of them picked out Barry George. In fact, either one or both picked out someone else.
Whilst Barry George was being held in custody, forensics made a discovery that would change the course of the investigation.
Everything gelled for the police when they were told by the forensic science experts that they had found a very, very tiny trace of firearms discharge in the pocket of the coat that had been taken away. It was said to measure around about 0.5 of an inch. It was tiny.
Remember, we're talking about a year after the shooting, and it matched the firearms residue at the scene.
But the interesting thing about it was that the chemical composition, according to the scientists, was exactly the same as the bullet which had killed Jill Dando.
They also found a single fibre at the crime scene that matched the material on a pair of trousers owned by prime suspect Barry George. On the 29th of May 2000, Barry George was formally charged with the murder of Jill Dando.
There was a lot of press interest in him. Obviously, because identification was a key issue in the case, and the police were very keen that lots of pictures of him didn't appear. And that was slightly odd because at the very beginning of the trial, the court then gave permission for pictures to be released, and there was this huge amount of coverage about him at the start of the trial, all these different images of him, and it was considered that was quite sort of prejudicial towards him, really.
Barry George's trial for the murder of Jill Dando got underway at the Old Bailey in February 2001. It was a trial that would captivate the nation and proved to be one of the most controversial cases in British criminal history. He pleaded not guilty.
A trial at the Old Bailey for anyone is a pressured event, especially if it's in one of the old courts, which it was, because they've held many famous trials. Certainly most of the UK press and media were there on a daily basis. So the court was full of people interested in the result.
During the trial, the prosecution presented George as a lone gunman with stalker tendencies. But his defence counsel painted a different picture.
We tried to present Barry George, obviously as the person that he was, just very vulnerable person, living in the locality, relatively well known in the locality, who had an alibi, which he'd obviously produced to the jury, and basically as somebody who, in a sense, wasn't capable of carrying out this murder.
The case against Barry George centred on forensic evidence.
The gun residue was clearly the key issue because it linked, according to the prosecution, it directly linked Barry George to a gun, to the murder.
You have to remember, no firearms residue was found in his flat or found in anything else to do with him. So if he's supposed to be adapting weapons or playing around with weapons, where was he doing it? He certainly wasn't doing it in his flat. He didn't own lots of flats all over London. One had to examine the possibility that it had got there through an accident of continuity. In other words, it was contamination.
The prosecution relied heavily on the identification evidence. They relied on a fibre which they found, which they said linked Barry George's trouser to Jill Dando, that the fibre had come off the trousers and onto her clothing.
This case depended largely on circumstantial evidence. And plainly, from a prosecution point of view, forensic scientific evidence can be rather more compelling than any other.
It was circumstantial, and they admitted it was circumstantial, but the judge and the prosecution both said that it was possible to convict on the basis of circumstantial evidence without, for example, a confession, without an eyewitness who had actually seen a gun used, without the gun itself, without a motive.
After a trial lasting 5 weeks, a jury of 6 women and 5 men found Barry George guilty of the murder of Jill Dando, and he was sentenced to life in prison.
I was very upset, I was very angry at the fact that he'd been convicted. I had plenty of time to think back over the trial and say, well, what's gone wrong here? How did this jury come to that conclusion? I think it's probably a combination of somebody who kind of looked odd in the dock, somebody who looked odd, which fitted the publicity that had gone before. Secondly, I think there was pressure on this jury, feeling that the nature of the crime was so heinous that, you know, here was an odd man and he lived in the area and there was a firearms particle. And they put that together, I think.
Despite the verdict, Barry George always protested his innocence. And as he began his sentence, there was growing unease at the decision to find him guilty.
From that point on, people began to get behind Barry George, to campaign for a fresh look at the case, and arguing that there was something wrong here, that it was a miscarriage of justice. His defence managed to mount an appeal. As the years went on and Barry George remained in prison, a campaign built up to get him free.
Eventually, new forensic research cast doubt over the significance of the gunpowder traces used to initially convict George, and the case went to a retrial.
The Court of Appeal argued that if the evidence in the pocket had been found a day or so after the murder, then it was key evidence. There was a link. But because there had been such a long period of time, it was no longer safe to assume it was linked to the murder.
The forensic evidence was deemed unsafe, and after 8 years in prison, Barry George was finally cleared of the murder of Jill Dando.
The prosecution maintained that he was an obsessionist with a fantasy about guns and a grudge against the BBC. The defence simply said, what we have here is the police have arrested the local nutter. And that was the phrase used by William Clegg QC, who now appeared for Barry George. And the jury accepted that there wasn't sufficient evidence.
Because I'm a firm believer that the truth will out in the end and justice will be done, but some people have to wait far longer than he did. And to give him his due, it's his persistence, his self-belief that got him acquitted.
In 2007, an appeal court deemed the evidence used to convict Barry George as inadmissible, and the following year, at a retrial that lasted 8 weeks, his conviction was quashed. He was released from prison in August 2008, having spent 8 years behind bars for a crime he had now been acquitted of. But more than 20 years on, the murder of Jill Dando seems as inexplicable as the day her body was found on the doorstep of her Fulham home. The acquittal of Barry George left many unanswered questions. Chief amongst them, if it wasn't Barry George, just who else would want to kill Jill Dando?
It all comes back to why was she actually attacked? Whoever did it had to know she lived there. Whoever did it took steps to make sure that nobody tried to stop them leaving. Had to have had a weapon which they had loaded and ready to use.
I mean, I believed throughout the case, because of the nature of the evidence and the window of opportunity, it had to have been carried out by a professional.
Some theories linked Jill's murder to her job as presenter of Crime Watch.
So there were a number of theories that emerged in the aftermath of Barry George's acquittal. And I guess into this vacuum, all these theories came. And one of them was that Jill could have been shot by the IRA. And I think that has its origins in somebody in a prison cell saying that they'd heard this story, that because of her Crime Watch association, that somehow or other the IRA were concerned that she might identify some members, and so that they had, put out a hit on her, as it were. That was very similar to the suggestion of a North London crime family who also was said to have been outraged by her interest or Crime Watch's interest in their activities. And so it was suggested that they too had put out a hit on her. Maybe those theories have some weight, but the police would have investigated them.
Another theory, mentioned by Barry George's legal team, suggested that Jill Dando may have been assassinated by a Serbian hitman.
There was the possibility that her death had been linked to the Kosovan War because she made an appeal on behalf of the Kosovans, and a few days before, the Belgrade TV station used by the Serbs had been bombed by the NATO allies, and this could be a tit for tat.
I know that there was another theory in relation to her death which seemed to have gained some credence on social media, that she had been investigating a VIP paedophile ring or had been told about the existence of such a ring of people, and that had prompted her investigation, and that the ring had conspired to kill her so that they wouldn't be exposed by her inquiries.
There wasn't a clear explanation. It wasn't a sex attack, it wasn't a robbery. It was an assassination of some description, and that left people very, very puzzled.
The fact remains that Jill Dando's next-door neighbour looked out of the window after what was the shooting and saw somebody leaving, closing her front gate and setting off down the road. So this person could be anyone. He could be the hitman from the North London crime family. He could be the IRA assassin. He could be the Serbian hitman who's been sent over from Belgrade. Could be almost anyone. We just don't know who he is.
What we were all conscious of throughout the inquiry was what a senseless crime this was. And the feeling of shock, to a degree, throughout the country never really diminished.
My own view is that the person who was responsible was the person that was seen in the street multiple times that day, who has never been identified. And I think it's highly unlikely that they were a hired assassin or a contract killer. I think it was, the stalker, loner, obsessive type person who had an interest in guns, who had an interest in television, celebrities. They don't have any connection to Jill Dando, probably, and therefore it's going to be incredibly hard to identify them.
More than 2 decades on from her murder, Jill's legacy lives on with her friends and colleagues.
Jill Dando's name will live on because the BBC founded a scholarship for her, in her name, for a young media trainee. And there is an Institute of Criminology named after her, which has actually been very successful.
When something like this happens, for everybody, whole communities, to feel sucked in and feel grief and distress and fear about something like that. But you do have to take a step back and look at the perspective of it, and it was a unique event. It was just extraordinary, and please God, nothing ever like this happens again.